What is up, you guys? Welcome back to another edition of the podcast. My name is Ramon. This is Dad's podcast project. And today I wanted to talk about Avengers Endgame. And this is going to be a spoilery review. I just had the opportunity to watch it over this weekend. And for those of you who have not seen it, I would recommend that you just stop watching now. I'm going to get into all the details of this film, my thoughts on it, how it rattled me as a parent at some points in this movie. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get right into it. So Avengers Endgame, I believe the 22nd film in this entire just monumental franchise. We've had 21 films leading up to this point. And we're finally here, the end game, with Thanos returning and just an epic all-out battle. And you might be wondering, well, why are we talking about this on Dad's podcast project? It's very family-oriented, to be honest with you. There's a lot of nods to just family in general. And as I mentioned in the title, this review is going to be full of spoilers. If you've not had the opportunity to watch this movie or you don't want to hear any spoilers whatsoever, I recommend you just stop watching right now until you've seen the film, then come back and give this one a watch. And yeah, it's just, and in addition to that, if you're watching on Instagram, this may be one of my longer formatted podcast episodes that I'm doing solo. So if you want to see the full review, be sure to head over to my YouTube channel or listen to it on iTunes or on Google on the Play Store. Links are going to be in the description of or pretty much just links will be on my Instagram. So the movie opens with Hawkeye. He's on house arrest. He's with his daughter, his wife, and his two sons. They're off in the distance. They're having a picnic at home, and he's teaching his daughter how to shoot the bow. And she ends up, he's reminding her, square up, take your time, 3 fingers, make sure your aim is true, then go ahead and release. And she goes ahead and does it and hits a bullseye. And he's like, right on. That's awesome. Go ahead and get your arrow. Wife's calling out to them. What do you guys want on your hot dogs? And he's like, oh yeah, mustard for us. He turns back around and his daughter has turned to ash. He's not seen her turn to ash, but for those of us who have seen the previous film, we see the ash kind of just fading off into the breeze. So we know what's going on. And you hear that thunder rumbling. And then he's just like, what happened? Where are you? He's yelling out her name as he runs up to the tree. He runs around it looking for her. And he's like already in a panic. When he turns around to look for his wife and his kids, they're gone. They've also turned to ash. And he's just like, what the heck? And he runs out into the open field. This guy, he's a really great actor. And he runs out into the field yelling for his wife. And they're gone. And right away, that's how the movie opens, reminding you that, yeah, this happened. This is a thing. So then we fast forward, we go through the credits. Tony's given his sort of last words to his helmet for his wife, sort of giving in to the end, that they were able to hotwire the ship that they were on, and now they're kind of dead in the water, just sort of adrift out in space. I think he said like a light year or two or a couple of light years away from the nearest solar system or the nearest star system. And all of a sudden, Captain Marvel comes and just scoops him up and brings him right back to the Avengers headquarters. They did some pretty good CG on him. He's looking pretty lanky, like he's been not eating very well on this ship. I imagine they only had packets of rations available to them. And so because of that, he's lost some weight while on there. He gets back and Cap is there to greet him. And he's like, I tried and I lost. Cap looks at him and he's like, yeah, us too. And he's looking around like, is she okay? He's referencing his wife, and she comes running up to him, Pepper Potts, and he's just like, "Oh, all is good. You're safe." Unfortunately, he lost Spider-Man and a few others that were out there helping him, but his wife is good. So everybody's kind of like huddled around the table thinking to themselves, well, what are we going to do? Like, how can we find Thanos? We've got a new member on the team now. We got this Captain Marvel here. What can we do? And it's sort of just figuring out a way to get there, and just kind of the methods that they're using to reassemble the team. There were a lot of long points to bring this together. Other reviews that I had seen had really hit on the point that, oh, this movie's like, it just keeps you going like one after the other. Like I didn't feel like it was as intense as the last film. I felt that the last film, Infinity War, was a film that followed Thanos more than the rest of the characters, and it was really his story. And so I felt that the pace of that film had a little bit better tempo. This one, there were a lot of slow moments. There were a lot of moments where they had just a lot of dialogue until that transitioned them into the next. But essentially, they were just trying to figure out a way to get these stones back to reverse the snap. And they make it out there to the planet that he ended up retiring on. And he used the stones to destroy the stones. He looked at it like, this is the plan. I don't want anybody reversing it. So I had to ensure that it couldn't. The stones were a temptation, was what he had said. And not being too happy with that, Thor ends up chopping his head off. Boom. Referencing the phrase, I went for the head. And that got a little chuckle out of the crowd. So he's already kind of just depressed. Like, he had his shot in the previous film, and he really felt like he missed. Like he could have stopped it all, but he didn't, or he couldn't. And so everybody kind of comes back. It's 5 years later. So 5 years that this whole half of the universe, half of the planet Earth, and all living beings have been gone. So they're referencing even animals too. So like birds and whatnot, dogs, cats. And they come back, and Cappy's hosting like a, what would it be called? A group session for people who are depressed about the loss and like how to move on. And because he's a soldier, he's kind of helping them through this trauma that they're going through when you lose someone and it's out of your control. So Ant-Man ends up coming back into the mix out of the quantum zone, the quantum realm. If you guys have seen the Ant-Man films and you know what was going on with him, I feel like you don't necessarily have to see the rest of the films to understand it, because they do kind of bring you up to speed with the dialogue. But if you're a little lost, it would be good to see a good majority of these films, if not all of them, to kind of get the backstories, because they glaze over some of them. They don't really go into full detail about everything. This is definitely a film that services the fans who have seen all, if not most, of the films. So he comes back, informs them he was in the quantum realm. Time works differently. If we get these stones, can we travel through time? Everyone thinks it sounds ridiculous. He's like, maybe it's a shot. We can go get the stones before they've ever been captured by Thanos and undo the snap. So they go to Tony Stark, and here's where, these parental kind of moments come into play. And he's on a house on the lake, and he's walking out. There's a little tent set up, a tiny chair, and he's calling to his daughter and telling her, it's time to eat. Like, we got some lunch going. Are you hungry? Let's get in the house. And just that kind of moment between the two of them, like, here he was, this superhero. He was this guy who was trying to do his best for the universe. And now all he can really do is the best for his family. So he's sort of hung it up. And he even tells them when he's back, like, Cap is real adamant about revenge, about trying to do right. and Tony's just defeated. He saw Spider-Man turn to ash right in front of him, and he rips the reactor off of his chest and he gives it to Cap, and he says, if you want to go after Thanos, put this on and tell me how it goes. Because he gave it all he had and he lost. I believe he was the only one that drew blood from Thanos as well. So in the end of it, he was just like, I'm done with this. All I have is my family. I'm not going to try to go back and lose that just because we've already lost so much already. So Cap, Black Widow, Ant-Man, they roll up to his house when he's taking his daughter inside for lunch. And he's just looking at him like, what are you guys doing here? Yeah, I already told you guys, I'm done with this. I'm hanging it up. And they pitch him the idea. And there's, some comedic stuff. He hits Ant-Man with this. Do you think time travel, like, are you referencing this whole scheme of yours off of Back to the Future? And it's like, yeah, pretty much. Like, that's how I think time travel works. Back to the Future. And he's like, no, it's impossible. And he's referencing all these other scientific terms. I don't know if they're real or if they're just made up for the film, but they sounded pretty good. And just saying how it's impossible to do it. You can't travel through time. So he tells them, get on with it. Go ahead and go. If you guys don't want to talk shop, you're welcome to stay for lunch, but we're done here. So they take off, and sure enough, it's a problem that's presented to Tony that tickles his interest and his intellect, and he ends up taking a crack at it. And he's working in his den on his little heads up computer system, and he's running through simulations, and he's even telling the computer, like, go ahead and run the simulation. If it doesn't really work, then that's fine. Let's just try it, whatever. Like, he's really not investing 100% of himself into this, and it ends up working. It's a successful model of how to track a person who enters the quantum realm, send them to a certain location, and be able to bring them back to the present. And he looks at it like, oh man, I did it. And I mean, he drops a curse word and he turns around, and his daughter's sitting there on the bottom step watching him, and she ends up repeating the curse word he said. And he's like, no, that's only for daddy. That's, you can't say that. Don't repeat what daddy's saying. And he looks at her like, why aren't you in bed? You should be asleep right now. It's really late. And she kind of leverages the fact that he cursed in front of her and says to him, well, I need popsicles to help me go back to bed. And this just kind of touches on, if you're a parent, you know exactly what this is like. Your kids, they're always going to try to negotiate with you if they don't want to go to bed, or they don't want to do something, or even if they want something, they'll try to find a way to get around whatever rules are set in place. So he looks at her like, well, you drive a hard bargain. Let's go get some popsicles, and then it's off to bed. So he's tucking her in, and she asks him for a bedtime story. And again, this is what kids do. They try to prolong, they try to push out the whole, I don't want to go to bed yet. So he ends up telling her like a total dad story. Once upon a time, there was a little girl named so-and-so, and she was really sleepy, and it was time for bed. The end. I mean, I've done that with my son too. I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys out there, parents yourselves, have done this with your kids. But she looks at him like that was the worst story ever. And he hits her back with, well, you should be asleep. You shouldn't be awake. So he tells her he loves her, and she tells him he loves her 3,000, or she loves him 3,000. Kind of like, that's a big number. She loves him a lot. He's like, wow, 3,000, huh? So he goes downstairs, and his wife is there reading, and he sits down, and he's kind of like nonchalantly like, our daughter told me she loves me 3,000. And, you were down in the 100 to 200 range yourself, but, I don't feel bad. She loves me more. And I think that, as parents, we kind of do that too. We take jabs, like who loves the other a little bit more. And then he hits her with the, I figured it out. And she's like, can we get on the same page here of what we're talking about? And he's like, time travel. But a part of me feels like, and I'm referencing what Tony's saying, a part of me feels like taking this and just throwing it at the bottom of the lake. It's like he's found a solution that may fix all that had been done. But because of what he has, there's this innate kind of fear of losing that. Because there's always a trade-off in these stories, that you do something grand and there's always a sacrifice. And I don't think he was willing to sacrifice the safety of his family, of what he has, because everybody lost something. And he lost Peter Parker, but he still has his wife. He still has his daughter. He can move on. He can live throughout his life with this guilt, but know that he has them, the people whom he loves the most. And that can keep him going. But she looks at him, well, would you be able to rest if you did that? Because I think she's also referencing that he's also the type of person that if he can do something, he will do something. Not so much thinking about how it affects him, but how it's going to affect everybody. And it's that selflessness that is very difficult to kind of turn into a different direction. She's told him, it's been the greatest failure of my life, trying to get you to not do something that you want to do. So he ends up going through with it. They get the team back together. They get Thor, who's end up packing on a lot of weight. He's just sort of beer and video games at this point. And it was classic too, because they put a fat suit on him. Like he had the rolls, he had the love handles going on, still yoked out with the biceps, but pretty much just drinking his sorrows away. And Hulk and Rocket, they end up going up to get him. And the only way that they can entice him to come along on this trip is that, hey, we got beer on the ship, so why don't you go ahead and come with us? So they get this whole thing put together and they end up going on this trip, and they find that there's 3 points in time that they have to go to in order to capture these stones. And they end up going to the battle in New York that happened in the first Avengers. That's where the Tesseract is, and that is also where the scepter is. So they go there to get those things, and another team goes to Volmir, where the Soul Stone is, and Morak, I think, where the Power Stone is. And then the final team, they go to pick up the Time Stone. Or no, the Time Stone is also in New York. The final team, they go to Asgard because they have to pick up the Spirit Stone, I think it is. I can't remember what it is. It's the red one. So they go there to pick that up. So it's Thor and Rocket. They're there to get that stone. And it's funny, they actually bring back, unless it was a pre-recorded scene, Natalie Portman's character to the film, just for that little part. Because apparently, I didn't see that Thor film, but apparently she has the stone within her. So he has like this futuristic syringe to extract it. But Thor comes across his mother. And apparently in that film, again, I've not seen that film myself. Apparently she dies that day. And he sees her. And it's another one of those moments in the movie that really hits you, especially those who may have lost parents themselves, that sometimes we find ourselves in a position where we're feeling really low. We don't feel like we're adequate enough, or like we're good enough, or that we're fulfilling our purpose. And we almost need that assurance that only a parent can give. Sometimes only a mother can give. And he sees his mom and he's kind of following behind her, kind of trailing, because it's the last time he gets to see her. I don't know where he is during that time in the film, but future him is there in the castle following her. So she ends up sensing his presence and catches him. He's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, well." And then she asks him, "What are you wearing?" Because he's like in baggy sweats, and they even reference Big Lebowski and calling him the dude or something. And He totally looks the part, just a total beard and beer belly and, baggy, sweaty clothes. And his mom actually is like, you're my son, but you're not from this time. And he's like, I didn't say I was from the future. And she's like, don't lie to me. I was raised by witches. I see with more than just these eyes. And he's like, okay, I'm totally from the future. And he starts crying and bawling. And then they end up going back to, I think, her chambers or her room. And she kind of consoles him and tells him, you're going to be great. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And all of these just words of encouragement that parents give their children every time they need to hear them. And he wants to tell her something. He wants to tell her what's going to happen. And she stops him. And she says, whatever will be, will be. That don't try to change anything here. That this is the moment that we get to have with each other. And he gets to tell her that he loves her one last time. I mean, again, for anybody out there who may have lost a parent, sometimes you want more than anything in life to be able to say that again. And for him to have the opportunity, even if it is a science fiction film, if you care about the characters and you care about this franchise, that's a monumentous opportunity for anybody to have. And he gives her one last hug, knowing she dies that same day. And then boom, they're successful in their mission. They travel back to the future. The other ones, when they're in New York trying to get the scepter and the Tesseract, in the case you guys don't know, I'm really hitting on the parental parts of this film because that what really touched me the most. But they go back and it's after the battle and Ant-Man's there and Iron Man and Captain America, the three of them are there to capture these objects, and they're able to get the scepter. Captain America kind of fools the guys who end up taking it in their possession and tells them, I'm supposed to take it. There's word that there's going to be a theft, like someone's going to try to steal this, and they're looking like, well, we're the ones trying to steal it because secretly they're Hydra agents. And he tells them, no, don't worry, it's good. And he whispers in one of the guy's ears, Hail Hydra. So he looks at him like, whoa, Cap, you're on our side? Like you're secretly a Hydra agent? So that was kind of like an easy way for him to be able to acquire that. But then he ends up running into himself. And the past Captain America thinks he is Loki because Loki is shapeshifter. He can take the presence of or the image of anybody. So he's like, I got eyes on Loki, and they end up fighting one another. And past Captain America ends up getting him in a chokehold. And the only way to get out, he tells him, Bucky's still alive. Takes him totally and completely off guard, grabs that scepter real fast, touches it to his chest, erases probably just the memory of that fight from past Captain America's mind. He gets down to meet with Tony and Ant-Man, who are sitting in a busted up car, and they're looking at him like, we got a problem. Loki ended up acquiring that Tesseract in the fray and disappearing. So it's like, it's a total wash. We can't complete this mission. We failed. And Robert Downey Jr., he's like, his Iron Man's character ends up saying, well, I think I know of a time where we can go to and get the Tesseract and get some more of these little nanoparticles or PIM particles that help them to trace themselves through time. And Ant-Man, he has no idea what they're talking about, but Robert Downey Jr., he's like, looking at Cap, do you trust me? Let's enter this time and we're going to go there. And they tell Ant-Man, go back to the future, take this scepter with you. We're going to go get the Tesseract even further back in the past. So they go back to a time where Tony Stark's dad and that Dr. Pym, the guy who created the Ant-Man costume and everything, and even brought Ant-Man up under his wing, are actually working at the same facility. So they go there, the Tesseract's there, Robert Downey Jr. ends up grabbing it. Captain America, he ends up going and getting the Pym particles, but at the same time, he runs into not Pepper Potts. He runs into Peggy Carter, who is the love of his life. He's referenced it in this film. I'm sure he's referenced it in previous films. He bumps into her. She doesn't see him. They're on opposite sides of a window. He's in her office, and she has a picture of him on her desk, knowing that she still feels love for him, even though he's gone in her time. And he's just looking at her, just mesmerized, like caught in a gaze that he's able to see her again. Because for those of you who remember, he ends up going down in a plane crash, and he tells her, I'm going to have to take a rain check on that last dance or on that dance, because they were supposed to go out dancing together. And he goes down with the ship and gets encased in ice for over 70 years. So for him to be able to see her again alive, not as an elderly woman, for those of you who saw Winter Soldier, it was probably something that was really good moment to give him pause, but he knew the mission. So he didn't intervene or try to do anything to compromise the mission that they were on. Now, Robert Downey Jr., or Iron Man, he ends up coming across the Tesseract, and he cuts through the encasing that it's in. He puts it into a briefcase, and a guy calls out to him. He's like, "Hey, what are you up to?" And it's his dad. It's Tony Stark Sr. And he's like, "Are you new here?" And they kind of have this conversation with each other, and he tells him like, "Oh, he asks him like, do you want to get some fresh air? Do you want to go out and grab a breather? Because you kind of look discombobulated down here." So they end up taking the elevator up, and Tony looks at him like, "Oh, sauerkraut and flowers. You got a big evening planned?" And he said, "Well, my wife is expecting." And he's like, "Really?" He didn't realize at this time, like, he is a baby in his mom's belly. He's like, "How far along is she?" And he's like, typical 70s man. He's, she's at the point where she can't stand the sound of my voice. Like, that's how far along she is. And again, this is like another moment that kind of is really touching for like parents in general. And I think once you have children, you can completely and totally understand. So they're taking the elevator up, and he tells his father, who doesn't know that, Tony Stark is his son yet. I have a daughter. And he's like, I think a daughter would be easier. Less chance of her growing up to be just like me. And he said, "Really? Why would that be so bad?" And he was telling him that, work kind of gets in the way and the greater good. And kind of a nod to how Tony turned out to be as a man. And he then asks him, he's like, can you be honest with me? Like, here's his father asking him for advice. And we've all been in this position. Like, I think as children, we look at our parents like they know everything. But I'll be the first to tell you, I'm just figuring it out as I go. My wife and I, we're both trial and error. That's what it is. We listen to some parents, we read some articles, we watch some videos, but at the end of the day, we're just trying to figure it out. And he ends up asking Tony Stark, who is his son, "Did you feel qualified for the job? Or did you feel qualified to operate this piece of machinery?" And Tony tells him, "I kind of just figured it out as I went along." It's like it's a trial by fire is what it is. And he ends up thanking him. He doesn't break down and say, "I've always loved you, Dad." He ends up just giving him a thank you, and then it's an awkward hug that he gives him. And his dad's looking at him like, "Why is this stranger hugging me?" He's like, finishes with, "Oh, for your service for this country." And then they travel back to the future themselves. Scarlett Johansson and Hawkeye, they end up getting the Soul Stone, and to just kind of briefly glaze over that, because there's so much to this movie. For those of you who know, it's a soul for a soul. So one of them has to die. and it ends up being Scarlett Johansson. Hawkeye wants to sacrifice himself, and he even tells her, tell my family I love them. And she looks at him and says, tell them yourself. And they both go to jump off the ledge, but Scarlett Johansson ends up using that little whip thing, their wrist kind of grappling hook that she has, and she attaches it to him and catches it into the rock, and then he holds her arm and he can't hold on much longer, and she tells him, just let me go. And that is like a great way to make such an emotional moment, because these two, they have such a long history together working with one another. And though he has a real family, her family has always just been the Avengers. She's never really known her true parents or her family. I think that I don't know her full backstory, but she references in this film, her family is the Avengers. And he's just totally like, this is messed up. Like, in order to get this stone, this is what you have to go through. And he gets back to the future and everyone's looking around like, did we just do it? Did we finish this? Did we complete this mission successfully? And Bruce Banner, the Hulk, looks at him like, where's Black Widow? Where's Nat? And he's just looking like, she didn't make it, man. And everybody's depressed. So there's that moment of just emotion that ripples through the entire team. And then we cut forward, because there's no way to really segue off that. We cut forward. Tony's then assembled an Iron Man version of the gauntlet, and he's put the stones in. And it's like, okay, well, who's gonna do the snap? Because we got to bring this back. And the whole time, I think I skipped over War Machine and I forget her name, the blue robot woman. They end up going to the planet where Quill, Star-Lord, ended up getting the Power Stone. And they cut back to that whole dance scene that he's going through in the beginning of the first Guardians of the Galaxy. And then they cut back to them, and he's just really just dancing in silence. Like, the beginning of the movie is playing a really great soundtrack, but yeah, he's kind of just dancing and no one can hear anything. And they end up acquiring the stone. And Thanos, now that they're in that time, the two blue robotic women are now synced. Their minds are synced. And he's able to tap in to her mind through the one in the past. And he's able to see that he was successful in snapping his finger. He was successful in eradicating half of life throughout the universe. And that now these people who he's left alive are trying to go back in time to prevent him from even doing it altogether. And he's like, I can't have this. So he ends up sending her back to the future, this is where it gets kind of confusing, keeping the future her in the past and sending the past her, who's still evil, to the future to sort of corrupt things. So he sends her to the future. She ends up hacking into this computer at the same moment when they're debating on who should be doing the finger snap. Thor wants to do it. They're like, no, you're full of lightning and jelly probably. And the Hulk steps up and he's like, it's emitting gamma radiation. It's almost like I was made for this. And so he ends up putting the gauntlet on, and Tony tells him, just bring everybody back to today. Don't change anything. And he's really adamant, don't change anything, because I don't think he wants to lose his family. I don't think he wants to lose anything that he currently has. It's like, just bring everybody back to now. Don't bring them back to 5 years ago. So Hulk does the snap, totally rocks his body. He's like, his arm is now gimp. Half his body from his arm up to his face is just charred. And they're like, did it work? Ant-Man goes to the window, sees birds flocking to a tree that's outside. Hawkeye, his phone is buzzing. His wife's calling him. And Ant-Man's like, I think it worked. And as soon as he says that, boom, Thanos has been brought from the past. His ship has been brought from the past into the future, and he just lays waste to the Avengers facility, just drops bombs on them, blowing everything up. Everybody's like, what the heck? They were hit by total surprise. And Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America are the only ones who are kind of up and about. Everybody else, they were kind of knocked down into the lower levels. So War Machine, Rocket, Hulk, they're all down there, and Hawkeye. And Thanos, he's just sitting there. He comes down and he sits down and he tells his daughter, the evil one, go fetch me that gauntlet. Go get me those stones. She's like, what are you going to do? He's like, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to wait. And Iron Man and Cap, they end up stepping out and seeing him. And they're like, what is he doing? Thor's like, he's just sitting there waiting. So the three of them come down. The whole time Hawkeye, he's got the gauntlet. It fell down with him. And he's running away from some of Thanos' minions that are coming at him. And it's kind of like this whole kind of keep away situation where he's trying to protect this gauntlet. Thanos, in the meantime, looks up at the three of them and kind of gives that whole speech. This is inevitability. This is my destiny. This is what's going to happen. You guys, I don't even know who you guys are, but you guys are trying to stop this. And the fact that he left them alive and the fact that they would go through so much effort to try to undo everything that he's done, his new plan is not to do a finger snap to erase half of existence, but it is to erase every single atom in the universe and then rebuild a new universe with life that doesn't know revenge, that just appreciates the fact that they exist. And the Avengers can't have that. They're like, no, forget that. We're not on board with you with that plan. So right away they go at him and they try to fight him, and they're getting beat down. It's not looking good for them. Thor, he's doing the best he can, but Thanos ends up grabbing him, putting hands on him, rocking him. Tony Stark ends up getting rocked. Captain America ends up getting beat down. His shield ends up getting cracked. And then Thor comes at him again. And at this time, Thanos has got the upper hand. He takes the axe out of Thor's hands, or knocks it out of his hands, and ends up choking him. And Thor goes reaching his hand out for his axe to come to him. And Thanos snatches it out of the sky before it even gets to him, and then tries to press it into his chest. And here's when one of the most epic moments happens, because Thanos ends up getting rocked by Thor's hammer, which I also left out earlier. Thor ends up bringing his hammer back from the past. So he's got the axe and the hammer. And it's like, whoa. And then it flies back, and Cap is worthy enough to wield that hammer. And Thor's like, I knew it. Thanos kicks Thor out of the way. And there goes Captain America fighting with the shield and the hammer at the same time. And it's almost like he's worthy of possessing this weapon. He's calling down lightning and doing just all this crazy stuff as if he and this weapon have always been a team. Well, Thanos ends up getting the upper hand again and puts the beat down on Captain America, and then breaks into another speech telling him, it was never personal what I was doing, trying to eliminate half of all of life in this universe. However, because of what you guys did, what I'm going to do to your annoying little planet, I will take pleasure in. And now it's like, it's become personal for him. And you just see these ships landing with just thousands, like hordes of his minions coming out. The children of Thanos from the last Avengers Infinity War, all of those who had been defeated, they're alive again, because it's the past versions of themselves. They're coming out into the battlefield. There's big beasts that are being brought out. Everybody's there. And it's a truly epic shot cinematically when they take a wide angle lens or a wide shot, and all you see is Cap standing alone on the left side of the screen, and then Thanos with thousands of his minions and his soldiers standing in opposition. And Cap stands up like, this might be it, but if it's just me, I'm going to give it the best I got. And at that moment, after tightening his shield and getting ready to fight, you hear a staticky sound coming in on his headpiece, and it's his buddy. And he's like, on your left, I'm coming through. And then all these sling portals that the wizards can do end up opening up, and Black Panther comes out, and all of the Wakandans come out, and you got Spider-Man and Doctor Strange and the Guardians. They end up coming back, and you've got the remaining Asgardians and Valkyrie. Everybody who's been in a Marvel film, all of the heroes have made their way there to take a stand. And Ant-Man ends up becoming huge. He's saved the guys that were down in the basement. And then it's just this epic brawl between everybody. And the fight, everybody has their moment in the fight. Ant-Man and the Wasp, they're trying to get the van jump started because Hawkeye's like, what should I do with this gauntlet? And someone tells him, get it as far away from here as possible. But Banner comes back and he's like, no, we have to take these stones back. Otherwise, it's going to fragment the timeline. And there's going to be all these alternate realities. So they're like, okay, well, we got to get this gauntlet to the van and we got to take these stones back. Well, now it's the van is on Thanos' side of things and the gauntlet's on theirs. You got Spider-Man who's got the gauntlet for a little bit. You've got Black Panther who ends up taking the gauntlet for a minute. And in the end, Thanos ends up retrieving the gauntlet once again. Captain Marvel makes her appearance back. She was in the beginning and the end. She didn't have many parts in the middle, if any. There were none. And so she ends up coming back, and it looks as if she's going to rip his hand apart because she is just so powerful compared to him. And he sees that he has to use tactic against her. So he rips the Power Stone out of the gauntlet into his other free hand and then punches her with the power of that Power Stone, sending her just rocketing away. And I don't even think we see her again in the fight. He puts the stone back, and Tony and Doctor Strange, which they did have words earlier. When Doctor Strange comes back, Tony looks to him and he asks him, you said that there were however many millions, if not hundreds of thousands of possibilities, and in one of them we win. Is this that one? And Doctor Strange looks to him and tells him, if I told you how it ends, it wouldn't happen. Or if I told you it wouldn't happen. Like something along those lines. Like I can't say because everything's supposed to happen naturally. I can't influence this with my knowledge. So they end up having a moment where they lock eyes with one another across the battlefield. And I think Doctor Strange kind of gives him a hint. Like, it's you. And so Tony ends up rushing Thanos, grabbing the gauntlet, trying to take it from him. And Thanos like bats him away and gives another speech. This is inevitability, or I am inevitable, or whatever it is. And he snaps his finger and just nothing happens. Snaps it again. Like, what's going on here? Is this thing not working? And he turns the gauntlet and the stones are gone. And he turns to look at Tony, and the stones have now embedded themselves into his Iron Man suit, into the hand of his suit. And he tells Thanos, I am Iron Man. And he snaps his finger, and all of Thanos's minions and army and just all the forces that he brought, even the ships, I believe, vanish into ash. Thanos has no last words. He merely takes a seat in defeat, looking around like, this is it. And then turns to ash himself. Rhodey, he's the first to come up to Tony and put his arm on his shoulder. Spider-Man comes up, Mr. Stark, we did it. You saved us. You did it. Pepper pulls him away, Tony's wife. And this was probably the I would say the second hardest moment in the film, because Gwyneth Paltrow, she is a really amazing actress. And she comes up to him and he says, Pepper, Like that's the only thing you hear him whisper. And she says, "You did it. You saved everybody. Like you did what you set out to do." And he goes to look away because I think he feels in this moment like he let her down. He may have saved the universe in a sense, but at the cost of his family. And she tells him, "Look at me. We're going to be okay." And she's, really emotional because these are her last words to him. And she's like, "You can rest now." And he ends up passing away right there. And it's dead silent. There's no music, nothing. And the camera holds on her for a good few seconds as she lets out her emotional cry. Like she's not loud with it. She's like trying to keep it in, but she's still she's been broken by this moment. And again, an amazing performance by Gwyneth Paltrow. She's an amazing actress. And seriously, the crowd and the audience was sobbing. There was a definitely hit an emotional nerve, even with myself. I mean, we're talking 10 years in the making, 21 films to this, the 22nd film. So many Iron Man movies, Robert Downey Jr. being sort of that. I mean, he pioneered it with the first Iron Man. And every other film after that had been a banger and just kept the momentum going in this Marvel Cinematic Universe. So when he sacrificed everything and lost his life in the process, it was an emotional hit because we've all been on this ride for the past 10 years. And it cuts to a funeral service. They're putting, or it cuts to them like piecing things back together, I think. I can't even really remember 100%, but they end up, they do cut to some scene and then they add his voiceover, Tony Stark. And there's a funeral service at the lake house. And he recorded a virtual reality message of himself. He's sitting on a chair and they've got it set up to where he's pretty much sitting in the room with them. And it's for private friends and family only. And he's kind of going over the whole thing, saying, the probability of this, of a success, traveling through time and going through all of this, the chances of survival just seem so slim. And then he takes a step back and he's like, but you know what? This is what we do. And it's going to work out the way it's supposed to. And as he goes to turn off the helmet and end the message, he looks up and he does, like, his virtual self makes eye contact with his daughter. And he says, "I love you 3000." And he turns the message off. His last words to her. And that, like, I had that whole bitter beer face. Like I was trying to hold it in, like, come on, man, this is hitting me totally in the feels. Like I'm a father now. I mean, I feel these things, these movies, they move me now. Back in the day when I was younger, I mean, I didn't cry in movies. I didn't cry over movies. But now as a father, I feel like, yeah, this stuff definitely hits you right where it counts. The writers did an amazing job. The directors and the characters and the casting, all of it was put together really well. And it made you feel for these characters who were new, who were older characters, and some of the storylines that you may not have been filled in on 100%. Like I said, I didn't see the second Thor film. I didn't know this about his mother until I had seen it, or until I had seen this one. So just the fact that they ended on that note, it really touched me because, like, I just wanted to rush home after the movie and hug my kids. Unfortunately, they were already asleep, so I made sure to give them big hugs in the morning. But yeah, it was just a tremendous film. I give it, like, I would say a 9 out of 10. The only reason I don't give it a 10 is because, again, the pacing. They were filling a lot of story. They were telling a lot of story, and they were closing up a lot of things that needed closure. It didn't have the tempo that Infinity War had, but it definitely had the cinematic awe that can truly be captured and should be truly enjoyed on such a big screen. If you can see it in IMAX or RPX or whatever, watching on a big screen. I had watched a review where they were suggesting the same, like find the biggest screen you can watch this on and go watch it on that. It was just visually a stunning film to see. They did a really great job. And after the whole funeral processions and everything, they ended up giving Cap Thor's hammer and a box with all of the Infinity Stones and told him, take your time, take as long as you need. For us, it'll be 5 seconds. For you, however long you need to go, get these stones back to the time that we took them. So it's as if they had never left. And Bucky, or Cap's partner, gosh, I forget his name, if it's like Raven or something, like what his superhero name is, but he ends up asking him like, hey, do you want me to go with you? Tells him, nah, I got this one. Don't worry about it. And Bucky looks at him, and Cap tells Bucky, don't do anything crazy while I'm gone. And Bucky looks at him like, you're taking all the crazy with you. And I kind of felt like they had a moment there. Like he kind of knew what was going on when they had that exchange. Like, don't take all the crazy with you. Chances are you're probably going to do something crazy. So he ends up, boom, getting shot into the past. And the Hulk's like, all right, we're going to bring you back. Goes ahead, tries to bring him back, and nothing happens. And then they're getting an argument. Did he miss his timestamp? What's going on here? We got to get him back. And Bucky turns and looks off to the lake on a bench. There's a man sitting there. Tells him, hey, check this out. And Cap's partner ends up, or Bucky tells him, go ahead, go on. And he goes up, and it's old man Cap. Must be in his 80s, 90s. I'm not sure how old he would be at this point. But he's like, I'm sorry I didn't come back. I thought I'd try a little slice of that life that Tony had been talking to him about. Because I think it was in Civil War. He told Cap, the war's over. Like, try a slice of life. Try living. But Cap didn't see it. And of all the things that he had gone through, fighting Red Skull, the Nazis, being frozen for 70 years, the first Avengers, the Age of Ultron, the Infinity Wars, just all of this, and the culmination where it came down to him and Thanos toe-to-toe, getting his shield cracked. And I think that when he got sent to the past, he just figured, that's it. I'm retiring. And his buddy tells him, it's going to be hard living in a world without Cap, without Captain America. And he looks to him and he says, well, that reminds me of something. And he hands him this shield, or the shield, tells him to try it on, and asks him how it feels. He says, it feels like it belongs to somebody else. He's like, it doesn't. Kind of like it belongs to you, or it belongs to nobody. It belongs to everybody. And he shakes his hand and clasps their hands with his other hand, and his buddy sees he's got a ring on. He tells him, do you want to tell me about her? He's like, nope, I don't. And they cut away, and the old-timey music's playing. It's a quiet suburb, and they push in on this house. And it's at a time where, the door is ajar. The door's open to the house. So it's during that era when no one locked their front doors, when life was safer back then. And they push in on the living room where they have a picturesque window. And he is with Peggy Carter. And they're sharing that dance that he promised her. And then they look at each other, and I don't know if the door is ajar because he had just got there and pretty much professed his love for her, confessed his love for her, and told her, marry me and this, that, and the other. or if he had come home from work or whatever. But the door was half open. So I'm imagining he traveled back in time, went straight to her house, opened the door, and just hugged her and told her, I'm here for that dance. And then they kiss. And you can imagine if he has that ring on, chances are they got married and lived a long and happy life together. Again, this was an amazing film. I'm interested to see what phase 4 is going to be, but for the time being, I'm just going to relish in the moment of all these films and what they've brought to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If anybody is interested in this film, I definitely say go check it out. Watch it while it's in theaters. There's movies that just don't fit the grandness or the epicness on a television screen. And I can 100% admit that when it comes to Infinity War, when I saw that in theaters and then I caught it again when it's on Netflix, it is completely different. You don't get the same feel. You don't have that same experience. If you have the opportunity to see it in theaters, I'm fortunate. My wife, she said, I got the kids, go see this movie. So I went and I saw this movie. But yeah, that's my review. It's one of the longest podcasts I've got solo. My throat's getting tired. I'm getting tired. But I want to thank you guys for taking the time to listen to this. If you made it to the end, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you like the content. If you're listening to me on iTunes, be sure to leave me a 5-star rating or review. Both of you, if you haven't. And as always, till next time, you guys. See you.